So I'm Rabbi Shaner. It's wonderful to be here together as a community. We're just a second early here. I'm going to just let in a few more folks and should be okay. So this is an important week in Toronto, in the Toronto Jewish community. This is Holocaust Education Week, and as part of our community, that we are really excited to get together here and to remember the Holocaust together, but to hear especially the stories of our members. And in this case, Rita Starkman, who is our guest speaker, our guest of honor, who's going to tell us her story, is someone who has lived an incredible life and has a story that is not the story we normally think about when we think about the Holocaust. We tend to think about the Holocaust as having a general story, takes a general shape in our mind, and we tend to think we know all the details of what happened. And then when we hear from survivors, often the case is that each person's story is very unique, and that's definitely the case here with Rita's story. And so as I'm just going to let the last couple people in here, I want to say first just how grateful we are that Rita's agreed to come speak to the community in this way, and to say thank you all for joining us. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Rita, to speak. And then if you wouldn't mind holding questions or comments until the very, very end, we'll have a little bit of a chance to take some questions then. Okay, so for now, I'm going to invite Rita to unmute herself and to introduce yourself.
Hi, hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes,
we can hear you.
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet all of you, even though it's not in person. My name is Rita Starkman. I have been a member of Temple Sinai since the mid-70s. I have 3 wonderful children, 3 wonderful in-law children, and 7 amazing grandchildren. You'll have to excuse me, but my family is my life, and I love to brag about them. I have a good life, but it wasn't always so. I was born in 1941 during the Second World War in a city called Ostrowite in Poland. I was born into a family of 3 children. I was the youngest. I was born in 41. My brother was born in 45. No, I'm sorry. My brother was born in 35, and my sister was born in 33. In 1939, the German tanks rolled into Austrowitz, and life was difficult for the Jews. But it wasn't until 1941 that the Ostrowitz ghetto was established. This meant that all the Jews had to leave their homes, and we were all rounded up in an area, and there was some housing. We were all crowded together in, 2 or 3 rooms where there would be a family of, 10 people living there. I was told that I lived there with my parents, my brother, my sister, and my grandparents on both sides. Okay, so at first in the ghetto, they were not killing Jews, but after about three months of being there, the Nazis threatened to kill every Jew who at that time owned a fur coat, a radio, a bicycle, a gold watch, anything valuable. certain thugs from other towns were called in to kill some of the Jews, or actually to kill some of the Polish intelligentsia. Shortly thereafter, the ghetto started the first resettlement of the Jewish people, which included children, old people, unemployed men and women, and they were shipping them to Treblinka, one of the Nazis' extermination camp. My father had the foresight and knew that our family would be doomed if we all were together. So he decided to find some Polish families who would take us children and hide them. All three of us were given to three different Polish families. In 1942, he approached the janitor of our candy factory. My father was a candy manufacturer, and arranged with him to hide me for 1,000 zloty, whatever that amount was in Polish, a month. The Nazis were searching many, many Polish households, and if they were finding that any of the Poles were harboring Jewish children, they would kill the entire family. My sister was with a full Polish family, and the woman actually freaked out when she found out this was happening, and she threw my sister out onto the street, where she was picked up by the police and put into the ghetto. During the night of where was I? During the night of December 11th and 12th, 1942, the Germans liquidated the ghetto, killing over 1,000 Jews and taking approximately 11,000 to Treblinka to be murdered there. My sister was one of those children taken to Treblinka, along with several other members of my family, my grandparents, some aunts and uncles, and that was that. My father also had the foresight to get Polish papers and a Polish passport, because he actually spoke fluent Polish, fluent German, and he was passing himself off as a Pole. At some point, my father learned that the janitor who he had given me to was working nearby where he happened to be at the time. And so he went to the janitor. He just wanted to see how I was doing and if everything was okay. When he got there, the janitor told him that I was no longer with him. But he said he knew sort of where I was. So he told my father the story that because it was so unsafe to harbor Jewish children, he had a brother-in-law who lived somewhere in, I don't know, some field or something. And he had given him to this brother-in-law. He had given me to this brother-in-law to look after him. To look after me. So my father wanted to know who this man was, and he was going to go find him. But then the janitor said, but actually, she's not with him anymore. And he told him the story, that his brother-in-law took me on a train, and where we got to the end of where the train was going, it was a town called Rozvadov. Everybody got off the train, including this brother-in-law, and I was left on the train. A little while later, the cleaning people came and they heard a baby crying, and they found me, and I was taken to the police. Now, this was a small town, and they kind of thought maybe I was Jewish, but there was, pretty soon through the grapevine, everybody knew that a child had been found on the train. I was told, and I don't know if this is true, but I was told that they actually pricked my fingers to see if I could talk, if they could see if I was a Jewish child, but I couldn't talk, so it didn't matter. There was a woman, her name was Helena Materna. Her husband's name was Emil Materna, and she was in her 40s, no children, and she was dying to have a child. She came forward, and pretty soon she had taken me, and she didn't adopt me. Her husband adopted me because women didn't really have too many rights then. And they baptized me. They didn't know my name. The name I was born with was Henya Rosenberg, but they didn't obviously know my name. So I was christened Teresa Jadwiga Materna. And I went home with this family. Now, Emil, the husband, he was a decorated military person who worked for the, Polish underground and the Polish Policja. And he was on a wanted list by the Germans. Now, because of all the publicity that happened when I was found, and the fact that they came and they adopted me and took me, the Germans found him, arrested him, and sent him to jail in Krakow. Now, there was some thought that I was a Jewish child, and Helena was worried that something would happen to me or to her. So we left Razwadov and went to Krakow, where her husband, Emil, was in jail. When we got there, we lived with a sister of hers. And shortly thereafter, Emil died. He was killed in jail. I did not find this out till much later, and that's another story. So we lived in Krakow. I was a child. I was a baby. I didn't know any different. She was my mother, and she was very, very good to me. And I obviously loved her. And we stayed in Krakow until the war ended in 1945. We then went back to a city called Poznan, where Helena was actually born and most of her family was there. And we lived in an apartment building with one of her sisters. The war was over, but it was still a difficult place to live. In the apartment above was another relative. I think it was another sister or sister-in-law. And there were a couple of children, and one was my age, who soon became my very, very best friend. And I had a life of being a little Polish girl. Helena was was obsessed with me. She was very, very good to me. She was just amazing. And I had friends, I had family, and I was fine. We had another cousin who was older. His name was Stefan, and we always used to bug him, and it was sort of his job to look after us sometimes. And that was it. Now, my mother was shipped to Auschwitz, and luckily she survived. My father traveled from here to there, walked, took trains, whatever, and had many harrowing experiences. But thank God he survived. And my brother survived. My brother was he was with a couple of Polish families. There was one wonderful Polish woman who found him his first Polish family, and then things were bad there, so she found him another one, and eventually he went to live with her. But in the meantime, he had always also been in some camps with my mother, who was in a couple of different camps before she got sent to Auschwitz. And so my brother survived, and after the war, everybody started to come back to Ostrowitz, to the place where we lived. My father went back. My mother found her way back, and my brother. So it was time for my father to find me. So he went back to the janitor, who gave him the name of his brother-in-law and told him what he could, told him that I was adopted by this family, Helena Materna, and that I was adopted in this city called Razvadov. So my father went there, and he knew that they had a restaurant. So he went to where this restaurant was and found that it was all boarded up. So he went to a couple of neighbors. There was another restaurant about 3 doors away, and he asked them if they knew of a woman with a small child who used to own that restaurant. And lo and behold, some people did remember her. And this restaurant owner sent him to talk to another person who he thought would know where she had gone. My father found that other person who thought she had gone to Kelts, but he suggested my father talk to a third person who might have more information. So my father went to this dress store where this other woman was, and she didn't have any more information for him. But then as he was leaving, she said to him, she may have gone back to Poznan, which was the city where she was born. And of course, we did go back to Poznan. So my father went there and did some investigation, found out through the government offices, actually, where she lived. And he kind of staked out the apartment building. And eventually, one day, he came to her and he came, but he went to the second floor of the apartment building and knocked on the door, and a little girl answered. And he asked if Helena Materna lived there. And the little girl said, no, she lived downstairs. And this is my cousin's house. So he looked at me and realized that this little girl was his daughter. Anyways, he went downstairs, knocked on the door. Helena answered. He said that he was my father and that he wanted his child back. And of course, Helena was like dumbfounded. And she was like hysterical and saying, she's not your daughter, she's my daughter. And you have no right to be here, and all kinds of things. And my father said to her, I want to pay you for all your expenses and everything. And she just looked at him and said, do you think I would take money? Get out of here. So my father left, and he stayed around for a while, a few days, and he sort of staked out the
You said the
house.
little girl.
Yeah, but she didn't say how old she was.
Right.
Sorry, excuse me. If you would please mute yourselves so that Rita can continue speaking and we can continue listening, would be wonderful. Thank you.
I was born in 41. The war was over in 45. This was sometime late 45, so I would have been about 4.5 years old. Anyways, my father was following us around when we went to a store. One day we went to a little variety store, and he walked in there and he had a chocolate bar. He came up to me and said, oh, little girl, would you like a chocolate bar? And I kind of looked at my mother, and she nodded, and I got the chocolate bar. And my father was constantly trying to bribe her to give me up, and there was no way she wouldn't. So he had to go back to Ostrowitz, and he said, I'm going to reach out to you by mail. And she promised that apparently she promised that she would write back. So he did write some letters, and of course he never heard back from her. And one day there was a young girl, or maybe not so young, who happened to be going to Poznan, and my father asked her to go to see my other mother, I'll call her, Helena, and gave her the address, and just, to go and see and how I was doing and if everything was okay. Well, this girl went to Poznan, and when she came back, she came to my father and she said, she's not there anymore. She moved. So my father, not knowing what to do and how to handle it, he had a cousin, Jack Rappaport, who he asked to go and find out where Helena went, and to find her and to find me, which Jack did. And eventually he did find us and came and told my father. Now, my father, she wouldn't give me up, and my father couldn't pay her whatever because she didn't want anything. So at that point in time, my father thought, well, let's kidnap the child. So my father's cousin, Jack, had some friends who were Russian, and they pretended they were Russian diplomats, and they came to her house, knocked on the door. There was about 4 or 5 of them with guns and rifles, and knocked on the door. She opened the door, and they're like, we're here to take the child. If you don't let us take the child, we will report you. We'll send you to Siberia, and give us this child right now. And I was sort of in the background, and I saw these men. I was terrified, and I remember hiding under this little tiny table that was right in the hall figuring they couldn't see me, but of course they could, because it was right there, and it was, an open little table. But being a child, I didn't understand that. Anyways, Helena thought there's something fishy here. And I think somebody overheard, or maybe there was one of the cousins that was there, and she, just yelled, "Call the police." So my cousin and his friends actually had to leave, and they just ran out and disappeared and left. So there was nothing for my father to do except to go to court. So we did. I've just had a couple of notes as to when we went to court. The preliminary hearings were set for December 1945. There were many lawyers. There were a lot of people who gave testimony about the fact that, yes, I was my father's child, and yes, they knew I had been left on this train, and all kinds of things. There were many people that gave these testimonies. So the preliminary hearing, December 14th, 1945, we were all at the courthouse. And Helena and I were out in the hall, and she was holding me. Now, all of a sudden, a woman who I'd never seen before in my life came rushing towards me, trying to hug me and kiss me and grab me. And I started to scream. And apparently this was my mother, who hadn't seen me for about 4 years. And it was like a tug of war. She was trying to grab me, and Helena was trying to hold me back, and I was screaming, and it was ridiculous. So finally, one of the court officials grabbed me, tried to calm them down, and he took me into another room. There was a nurse in that room, and I was examined from head to toe, looking for any marks or any blemishes to see, because my mother had told the court I had no birthmarks, I had no blemishes, there was nothing, and they wanted to check that. So the trial was going on. My birth parents were very worried that Helena would try to disappear with me. And the court suggested that I be put into the city welfare guardian's office or into a daycare. But then after discussions back and forth, the court decided that probably would be too dramatic for me, seeing as how there was so much drama going on at that time. Now, the trial started December 14th, 1945. It went on for a long time. On April 1946, the trial ended. And on May 12th, 46, the adoption papers for me, Teresa Materna, had been annulled. My father won the court case on a technicality. The technicality being that Helena's husband, Emil, had adopted me. And since he was dead, I would revert back to my original parents because Helena had not adopted me. So the agreement, they read that the agreement of the adoption papers was such that if the person who adopted me was no longer alive, I would revert back to my original parents. And also, the adoption papers stated, since Helena did not adopt me, that she had no legal rights to me. So I was given back to my parents. Now, Helena was supposed to bring me back to Ostrowitz and stay with us for a while, because for me to get used to my parents, it was traumatic. Now, she kept on delaying and delaying and delaying, and by Christmas of 1946, she still hadn't come. But I think somebody got in touch with her, and shortly thereafter, she did bring me to Ostrowitz. We slept together. She stayed, I believe, with us for about 3 months. And one day I woke up and she was gone, and I never saw her again. Now, she had mentioned to me that she was sick and had to go to a doctor, but I was a child and I didn't understand all these things. While she was with us, I had gone through trauma. I was, taken away from a mother who I absolutely adored. I was told that these other people who I didn't know and hated were my parents. On top of that, I was then told I was a Jew. Now, during the war, Helena wasn't the type of person, nor her family, who talked badly about the Jews or anything, but you hear it on the street and whatever. They were always talking about, the Jews, they should all be killed, and they're dirty Jews, and we don't want them. And we're going to murder all the Jews. So for me to find out I'm Jewish, my mother's not my mother, and these strange people are my parents, and I now have a brother, I just, it was just too much. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to deal with it, but I also had no option. My cousin Dorothy Rappaport, who's Jack's sister, also survived Auschwitz with my mother, and they all came to live with us for a while. And Dorothy would come and play with me, and she would, and my brother would be there, and she would say, "Come." And they called me Teresa because I was just so used to that name, and that was my name, period. So I used to say to her, "He's not my brother. He's a dirty Jew. I don't want to play with him. He's a dirty Jew." And of course, she wanted to kill me at the time, but what could they do? I didn't want to eat any Jewish foods. I didn't talk. I only spoke Polish. I couldn't even talk to my mother, my real mother, because she didn't speak Polish. And they tried to get me to eat all these Jewish foods, which I couldn't eat them. I hated them. Eventually, I think my parents hired a Polish woman to do some cooking so that I would eat. Now, my parents were so good to me, my real parents. While we were still in Poland, they bought me so many toys and dolls, and they were just trying their best. And I remember my favorite toy was a little store. And I set it up in my father's factory, and anybody who came in had to buy something from me. I had little bins with little candies, of course, because my father was in the candy business. And I had little scoops, and I had a scale, and I had a little cash register, and I had a lot of fun doing that. I don't know how I transformed into actually first liking my parents and then actually adoring and loving my parents. I don't know how it happened. It kind of just evolved. Now, my father knew he had to get out of Poland because even though the war was over, there were uprisings. Poland was communist, and he knew he had to get out. So he tried to get some visas. It wasn't easy to go to places after the war. His first choice was Palestine, which today is Israel. But they weren't taking any people, period. They couldn't. At that time, it was under, I think, it was under British mandate. Next, and you had to have sponsors. Next, he found or realized that my mother had an uncle in Montreal. So he wrote to this uncle and asked him if he would sponsor us and to get the necessary papers that we would need. So he wrote back saying that Canada was not allowing immigrants, Jewish immigrants at the time. We couldn't go to Canada, but he had written to a relative of his in, I think it was Brazil, and this relative had arranged for us to get the papers. So we were packed up and ready to go to Brazil. Now, my father, after Helena left, was in correspondence with her, and he had asked her, he had told her that he would love to bring her with us. She saved my life. She was a very important person in my life, and he would bring her to wherever we went. He would look after her. She would live with us. He would support her for the rest of her life. But she refused. She had a lot of family, and she did not want to leave her family in Poland. So she didn't want to come with us. Now, my father sold his factory. We were packed. We were all ready to go. And the day that we were set to go to Brazil, we found out that all visas were canceled. We could not go to Brazil. We were stuck. So my father found out, I guess it was my mother's uncle who told him the only people that they would be letting into Canada were immediate family, sisters, brothers, husbands, wives, children of family in Montreal. So my father somehow got some papers produced that my mother, instead of being his niece, was his sister. And with that, he was able to get us visas, and we were on our way to Canada. We boarded a boat. It was called the Batory. And the boat actually took us to Ellis Island, where, again, my cousin, or my father's cousin, Jack Rappaport, had some family. we were in transit and we had to take the train to Montreal from New York. But they met us at the boat, and I know that they were in the restaurant business and they took us out for a meal. And I think it was probably the next day that we boarded the train and we went to Montreal. We arrived in Montreal. I still only spoke Polish. I spoke a couple of words of Jewish. And we lived with this uncle. He was very religious. I think he had about 8 children. Most of them were married. He was much older. And we lived with him. My father tried to get a job in Montreal. The only thing he knew was the candy business, and he couldn't get a job. So he heard somehow that maybe he'd get a job in Toronto. So he went to Toronto. We were left behind in Montreal. Now, my father did get a job with some candy factory. He actually, he went to Laura Secord and he applied for a job, and they wouldn't hire him because he was Jewish. But he did find a job at another candy factory. Now, that he came to Montreal, and then he bought a house. My father had money. He bought a house. He came back to Montreal to take us back to Toronto. Now, one thing that I forgot to say before was Helena. She was amazing to me. I was the sun, the moon, the earth god to her because she had wanted a child so badly. I had long hair and she used to wash it, and I used to cry all the time when she washed it because it would get knots and everything. So she stopped washing it. When I got to my parents, I had lice. So they had to cut off all my hair. Now, when I was in Montreal, somehow I went to a dentist. I don't know why, but they found that all my baby teeth had to come out because I never brushed. I didn't like it, so she didn't, because she would do anything for me. So all my baby teeth came out, and there I was. Now, we came to Toronto. My father had a job. My mother got a job. My father worked 2 shifts. He went at 6 o'clock in the morning to one job. And when that ended at about 5, he went to his next job, and he worked there till 12 o'clock at night, and then came home and slept a few hours and then went again. My mother just had the one job. She went early in the morning. I was put into school. I don't ever remember really going to school. I was put into school, and my brother also, and we would walk to school together. Now, my mother never really learned how to speak English because she was just always busy working. My father did. He spoke very good English because he was out in the world, and he eventually got his own business, and he really learned. Now, my brother and I woke up every morning. I don't know if we ever ate breakfast or not, but we went to school. And then we came home for lunch, and we had something. We had lunch and went back to school for the afternoon and came home at supper time. And my mother usually came home around supper time because she only had the one job, and she would make supper. But from a very early age, oh, by the way, we arrived in Canada December 1947. So I was 6.5 years old. And I didn't have benefits of seeing a psychologist or people to help me understand things or anything. I had to learn it on my own. So I guess I became quite resilient. And basically, I literally brought myself up. Even though my parents were wonderful, loving, and whatever, they worked. They had to work all the time. After about a year, my father decided that he was going to open up his own candy factory. And we lived in this house. It was on Ritchie Avenue in the Hyde Park area. And I made friends with a couple of people there. They were not Jewish, obviously. And there was one neighbor whose daughter I played with, and I loved going to her house because the mother was always home and she would always give me a treat. And she always gave her kids vitamin pills, and sometimes she would give me one too. And I loved the family because the father was home a lot and the mother, and I miss that in my own life. Anyways, when my father decided to open his own factory, we moved to a place, we moved to Kensington Avenue. There were a lot of Jewish people there, most of them refugees like us. And we lived on top of the factory. And we lived there for a few years. My father got more and more business. His business grew. And life was pretty good. We weren't wealthy or anything, but we had what to eat. My parents were around all the time, and that was great. Eventually, they outgrew the premises, and my father sold the building, and he rented a building on somewhere else, and he bought another house. And that house was on Chiltern Hill, which I lived in and they lived in for the rest of their lives. It was in the Bathurst-Eglinton area. It was in an area called Cedarvale. We had a lovely big house, and we rented out a couple of rooms and rented out the basement. And everything was, it was fine. My father went to work. My mother went to work in the factory, and us children were pretty much left on our own. I would get up in the morning. I never used to eat breakfast really, so it didn't matter. I went to school. I came home for lunch. I went back to school. And it was a long way to go, but I kind of brought myself up. I had no choice. I made friends, and we grew up. Eventually, my father outgrew that factory. Then he bought another building, and the business kept growing. And I used to work there on Saturday mornings, wrapping candies alongside all the other, he had a lot of Polish workers, so he could talk to them. I learned Jewish, and I learned English, and I totally forgot my Polish. So I was a little different than some of the other people. My parents never went to parent interviews. My parents really didn't know what went on at school. Thankfully, I guess I was a good student. And, I wasn't a bad kid. Although when I was young, and if, sometimes like I wanted something and I couldn't get it, A, because my parents were too busy, and B, because they really couldn't afford it. So I would just sometimes yell at them and say, you know, you're doing this because I'm not really your daughter. And obviously I must have hurt them a lot. But I was a kid and I didn't know any better. Now, when we came to Canada, Helena would write to us. My father wrote, she had our address, and she would write to me. And she actually, I believe, went and learned English so that she could write to me. I never wrote back. And to my dying day, I'll regret that. I was a child. I didn't know any better. I wanted, once I was in Canada, I wanted to fit in. We were newcomers. We were refugees. We were called kikes. I just wanted to fit in and be Canadian. And my father did write to her a few times, but he wanted to forget the Holocaust. He wanted me to forget her because he wanted to be my parent. He wanted me to love him like I loved her, and to love my mother like I loved her, and to love my brother. And so he didn't encourage me to write, and I didn't. And as I grew older, I felt very bad about that. And I do have that regret. Now, at one point in time, Helena wrote a letter, and in it, she said she was very sick and she needed some medication that she couldn't get in Poland. I took that letter to a drugstore, and I asked the pharmacist if he knew the medication and if I could get it. And he told me that he had never heard of that particular medication. And besides, he couldn't give me any unless he had a prescription. And he really couldn't give me anything to send to Poland. So I never did get her medication. And I believe at some point in time thereafter, a long time thereafter, she died. Now, what else can I tell you?
Rita, can I just sort of to
Sure.
say that we have our teens who are about to sign on in just a few minutes.
Oh, dear. I'm
You
so
really
sorry.
no. It's really an amazing story, and we're so grateful here. Would you mind maybe just taking a minute or two more, and then taking one or two questions from this group?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to Poland when I was a teenager or early 20s, but I couldn't because it was communist, and with my passport, they wouldn't have let me out of the country. I did go back in 97, or I think 98, with two of my children. My brother had found this cousin and best friend that lived up above me. We had written letters back and forth. She told me some things that I never knew. When I was found, I had boils all over my body. I had an extended stomach. I had rickets, all kinds of stuff. And she also, anyways, we made arrangements to meet in Poland. I did go with my brother, my two kids. We arranged for them to meet me at a hotel. They met me. She came with some of the aunts and with the cousin Stefan, who I found out him being the first person to get married and had a daughter, named the daughter after me, Teresa. I found out that it was because of me that Emil died, because of all the publicity. I found out that Helena never stopped talking about me till the day she died. I was scared that maybe these people would hate me because I never kept in touch, but they didn't. And I went to visit her grave. And as I say, I have many regrets, certainly one that we did not keep in touch. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much.
Rita, are you going to ask a question?
No, go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, Rita. It's Judd Rappaport, Nathan, and Rhonda's
Oh,
son.
I know, Judd.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, Judd. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Judd is a
questions.
cousin.
Yes, I'm a cousin. So, number one, what was the candy factory that your dad worked at when he first got a job in Toronto?
You know what? I can't remember the name of it, but I have to tell you something funny. When my father sold the candy business in about 70 something, he actually sold it to Laura Secord, which is why I mentioned to you that he went to apply for a job at Laura Secord, like in 1947, 48, and couldn't get a job because he was Jewish. And then in the 70s, sold his factory to Laura Secord. That was quite ironical.
That's funny. So, and my other question is, your brother, Jerry, used to always say that Jack helped save him in the war. And I'm curious, what was the story there?
You know what? I don't really know. I know that your grandfather, he was certainly helped my father to save me. And I'm sure like he was always there and he was always helpful. So, but I don't really know exactly. And I don't know.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you very much. Beautiful story.
Thanks, Judd.
I think we have time for one more if anyone wants to ask one more question. Well,
I do.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Hi, cousin Rita. It's cousin Brenda.
Oh, hi, Brenda.
I'm also a cousin. My mother was Dorothy Rappaport and my uncle Jack, who Judd just called. Rita, you're so heroic. It's unbelievable, really. But question, I wanted to ask one question. So your daddy was never in a concentration camp. He was always on the run, Dad?
My father was always on the run. At one point in time, he was picked up. He was put on a train and the train was going to Treblinka. Now, my father was beyond brilliant in survival. He figured out it wasn't a straight run.
Right.
It was sort of, zigzaggedy. He figured out at one precise point where the front of the train, where there were Nazi soldiers, would go one way and the back of the train would still be in another direction. And there were Nazi soldiers there. So, and he was in the middle and he actually jumped out the window.
Wow. But your mummy was in Auschwitz with my, like she went.
Yes, she was in Auschwitz with your mother.
But how long was your mom in Auschwitz for?
You know what? I think, I'm not sure. I think maybe maybe 2 years.
And then were they all, well, you don't remember, but they were together in the DP camp in Germany after the war? Or your dad wasn't, because he wasn't in?
No, my father wasn't there. I don't think, yeah, my mother, I know she, she went on this march and she was walking and eventually found herself back in Ostrowitz, in the place where we lived.
And then she,
I don't know. I don't think she was in a DP camp. I think she just went back to Poland. I mean, to Ostrowitz.
yeah, that's when everybody went back. But one question, I have this picture I'll send you. I don't know if I think your mother's in it and your brother's in it for sure. October 1945 reunion of the Ostrovcers that they went after the war.
Oh,
But
sure. There were lots of pictures after the war, and they were usually at the cemetery.
This is like weird. But then the other last thing is, what was your mother's maiden name?
Tochterman.
Tochterman. And how is she related to my father? Did you know that your father and my father?
Yes, I knew that. I don't know. I never knew that. I mean, I knew that your father was related to my mother, and it was so funny because your mother was related to my father. But
Right,
I don't know. I don't know the relationship. I know they were cousins.
thanks, Rita, for sharing, because you told me the story. It's unbelievable, and you're so brave, and you are the best booby, best mother.
Thank you,
wife.
Brenda. I love you too. Brenda was the
You-
bride, was a flower girl at my wedding.
Lo, you raised little. Anyways, Rita, thank you.
This has been it's been a reminder for me that these stories of survivors, like yours, Rita, they are family stories as much as they are, as much as they are personal stories, and as much as they are stories of our people. And so I'm really, really honored that you've welcomed the rest of us into your family here in this way, and to let you know that it's really amazing and brave the way you've told it. And I'm sure that I'm not speaking alone here when I say thank you so much for taking the time to help us get a picture of what it was like for you, and to understand that the Holocaust has more than one kind of victim and more than one kind of survivor, and that your story is one of incredible bravery and overcoming a real trauma, and that it's really important for us to remember that, and hopefully to go on and be able to tell these stories and remember them for a long time. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's the next generation that has to remember, and there's just unfortunately so much anti-Semitism these days, and so much of it, pretty much most of it, against the Jews. And people should just all live happy together